Princess Kira stood in the grand courtroom, her hands bound with heavy silver chains. The massive hall buzzed with whispers as hundreds of nobles watched from the gallery above. She had been brought here like a common criminal, but she kept her head high. Today would decide if she lived or died. Her younger brother Devon sat beside their father's throne, trying hard not to smile. For months he had been planning this moment. He wanted the crown for himself, and Kira was the only thing standing in his way. So he had created lies about her, paid people to give false testimony, and forged documents that made her look like a traitor. The emperor rose from his dark throne, his face cold as stone. Princess Kira, you stand accused of speaking against our sacred traditions. You have questioned the laws that have kept our empire strong for 1,000 years. Kira's voice rang clear across the hall. I spoke only truth, father. I said that ability should matter more than who your parents are. I said that good leaders aren't born, they're made through their actions. The crowd gasped. Such words were forbidden in their society. Everyone knew that noble blood meant everything, and common people were meant to serve, not lead. These ideas are poison, the emperor declared. They would destroy everything our ancestors built. The penalty for such treason is exile to the fire lands of planet Zirion 4. May the great dragons there show you mercy because I cannot. Guards grabbed Kira's arms and dragged her from the courtroom. Devon finally allowed himself to smile. The fire lands were filled with massive, hungry dragons. No one sent there had ever returned. His sister would be dead within days and the throne would be his. But Devon wasn't taking any chances. As Kira was loaded onto the prison transport ship, he made sure his bot guards were among the crew. They had special orders about the ship's navigation system. Captain Torres, one of Devon's men, waited until they were in deep space before making his move. He slipped into the ship's computer room and began changing the flight path. Instead of landing Kira safely on Zirion 4, the ship would crash in the most dangerous part of the Dragon territory. The navigation computer would make it look like an accident. The prince will be pleased, Torres muttered as he finished the sabotage. No one survives a crash in the deep wastes. Kira sat in her cell, staring out at the stars. She had always loved space travel, but this journey felt different. Something was wrong. The ship's engines sounded strange, and she noticed the crew acting nervous whenever they passed her cell. 2 days into the journey, her worst fears were confirmed. Lieutenant Ross, a young officer who had always respected her, slipped her a data pad during mealtime. Your Highness, he whispered urgently, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but the ship's course has been changed. We're not heading for the settlement zones. The navigation system is taking us straight into the flame territories, where the biggest dragons live. And the engines? They've been sabotaged to fail during atmospheric entry. Kira's blood ran cold. Her brother hadn't just exiled her. He had arranged for her murder, making it look like an accident. If the ship crashed in the deep wastes, no one would ever find her body. Devon would tell everyone that she died tragically while being transported to her exile. Is there anything we can do? She asked quietly. Ross shook his head sadly. The damage is too extensive. The engines will fail as soon as we hit the atmosphere. I'm sorry, Your Highness. I truly am. As if summoned by their conversation, the ship suddenly shuddered violently. Alarms began blaring throughout the vessel as the engines started their fatal malfunction. Through her small window, Kira could see the red surface of Zirion 4 growing larger. The ship spun wildly as it entered the planet's atmosphere. Emergency lights flashed as systems failed one by one. Kira braced herself against the walls of her cell as the vessel tore itself apart around her. The crash came with a thunderous roar of twisting metal and exploding fuel. Kira was thrown against the wall so hard she nearly lost consciousness. When the world finally stopped spinning, she found herself trapped in the wreckage of what had once been a proud starship. Smoke filled the air as she struggled to free herself from the debris. Her royal training had included survival courses, but nothing had prepared her for this. She was alone on a planet filled with dragons, with no supplies and no way to call for help. As she crawled from the burning wreckage, Kira heard something that made her heart stop. In the distance, carried on the hot wind, came the deep roar of approaching dragons. Her brother's plan was working perfectly. But Princess Kira had inherited more than just royal blood. She had inherited the will to survive. The burning wreckage of the transport ship sent thick black smoke into the orange sky of Zirion 4. Princess Kira pulled herself from the twisted metal, her royal robes torn and dirty. Blood trickled down her forehead, but she was alive. That was more than her brother had planned for her. She grabbed whatever supplies she could find in the wreckage. A small water container, some emergency rations, and a basic survival knife. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The ship's emergency beacon was completely destroyed, just like everything else Devon had arranged. The ground beneath her feet was strange, made of crystalline formations that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Right now it just looked alien and dangerous. A deep roar echoed across the crystal plains, much closer than before. Then another roar answered it from a different direction. Kira's blood turned to ice. The dragons were communicating with each other and they were getting closer. She started running, her feet slipping on the smooth crystal surfaces. Behind her, she could hear heavy footsteps and the scrape of massive claws against stone. The first dragon appeared at the crash site just as she ducked behind a tall crystal formation. The creature was enormous, easily the size of a small building. Its scales glowed like hot metal, and when it breathed, small flames escaped from its nostrils. It sniffed at the wreckage with intelligent eyes, clearly trying to understand what had happened. 2 more dragons arrived, circling the crash site. They were hunting her, and they knew exactly what they were looking for. Kira had read about these creatures in the royal archives. Pyroclast dragons were not mindless beasts. They were smart, organized, and very, very dangerous. She moved carefully from crystal to crystal, trying to put distance between herself and the crash site. But the dragons were spreading out, cutting off her escape routes. It was only a matter of time before they found her. That's when she heard the explosion. A bright flash lit up the crystal canyon, followed by a dragon's roar of pain and anger. One of the creatures stumbled backward, a smoking wound on its side. Something had hurt it, something that definitely wasn't another dragon. "Hey! Over here, run!" A voice shouted in accented galactic standard. A human figure emerged from behind a large crystal boulder, carrying what looked like a weapon made from scrap metal and ship parts. He was tall and dark-skinned, with short black hair and clothes that had seen better days. But his eyes were sharp and alert, like someone who had learned to survive in impossible conditions. "Move. They don't like loud noises, but it won't keep them busy for long," he yelled. Kira didn't need to be told twice. She ran toward him as the wounded dragon thrashed around, temporarily confused by the explosion. The other 2 dragons were already regrouping, their intelligent eyes scanning the area for new threats. The stranger grabbed her hand and pulled her toward what looked like a solid wall of crystal. But as they got closer, she realized it was actually a narrow gap, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "In here, quick," he said, pushing her into the opening. They pressed through the tight passage as the dragons arrived at the spot where they had been standing just seconds before. The creatures were too large to follow, but Kira could hear them outside, circling and searching. "Who are you?" she gasped when they finally reached a wider space deep inside the crystal maze. "Name's Tyler," he replied, checking his improvised weapon. "Been stuck on this lovely vacation planet for about 2 years now. My survey ship crashed during a storm, and I've been playing hide and seek with these big guys ever since." 2 years. Kira stared at him in amazement. "How have you survived?" Tyler's grin was tired but determined. "Same way my people always do. We figure it out as we go. See, the thing about dragons is they're really smart, but they think in patterns. Once you learn their patterns, you can stay one step ahead. Most of the time." He led her deeper into the crystal caves, moving with the confidence of someone who knew every tunnel and hiding spot. The passages were natural formations, worn smooth by wind and time, creating a maze that extended deep underground. "These caves go on for miles," Tyler explained as they walked. "The dragons know they're here, but they can't fit through most of the passages. It's not a perfect hiding spot, but it's kept me breathing so far." They emerged into a larger cavern where Tyler had set up what could generously be called a camp. Salvaged equipment was arranged around a small fire pit, and the walls were covered with crude maps and diagrams. "Welcome to my palace," he said with dark humor. "Not exactly 5-star accommodations, but the rent is free." Kira studied the maps on the walls. They showed dragon movement patterns, feeding areas, and safe routes through the crystal maze. This human had turned survival into a science. "You've been watching them," she realized. "Learning how they think." "Had to," Tyler replied. "First few months I was just running scared. Nearly got myself killed a dozen times. But then I started paying attention. These aren't just big lizards. They're organized. They have territories, hierarchies, even what looks like culture." Outside the cave, another dragon roar echoed through the crystal formations. But this time Kira didn't feel quite so helpless. She had found someone who understood how to fight back. "So," Tyler said, offering her some of his meager food supplies, "what's your story?" Most people don't end up crash landing in dragon territory by accident. Kira accepted the food gratefully. It's complicated. Let's just say my family has trust issues. Tyler nodded knowingly. Family? Yeah, I get that. Well, whatever brought you here, you're alive now. And as long as we're smart about it, we can stay that way. For the first time since her trial, Kira felt something she hadn't expected to feel again. Oh. Over the next few weeks, Princess Kira learned that Tyler was unlike anyone she had ever met. Where her people would follow ancient rules and wait for orders, he constantly found new ways to solve problems. He had turned the dragon's own behaviors against them, creating traps and diversions that kept them both alive. Your people think these dragons are just big angry animals, Tyler said one morning as they crouched behind a crystal ridge, watching a group of dragons in the distance. But look at how they move. See that big one in the center? That's the leader. The others are positioning themselves based on rank. That's not animal behavior. That's military organization. Kira studied the creatures through Tyler's improvised telescope. He was right. The dragons weren't just wandering around randomly. They were patrolling their territory with purpose and discipline. My tutors always said dragons were mindless beasts that destroyed everything in their path, she admitted. But these ones seem almost civilized. Tyler nodded. That's what I thought too until I started really watching them. Come on, I want to show you something. He led her through the crystal maze to a place she hadn't seen before. Ancient ruins rose from the crystalline ground, carved directly into the living rock. The architecture was beautiful and complex, with intricate patterns that seemed to flow like frozen music. I found this place about 6 months ago, Tyler explained, running his hands over the carved walls. Look at these symbols. This isn't random decoration. These are star charts, mathematical formulas, even what looks like poetry. Kira examined the carvings with growing amazement. Her royal education had included lessons in ancient languages and archaeology. These inscriptions are thousands of years old, she breathed. But they're incredibly sophisticated. Whoever built this had advanced knowledge of astronomy and engineering. And guess who's been living in these ruins? Tyler pointed to scorch marks on the walls and large claw scratches in the stone. The dragons didn't destroy this place. They're protecting it. Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made Tyler grab his weapons instantly. A deep, musical call echoed through the ruins, unlike anything Kira had heard before. It wasn't the aggressive roar of a hunting dragon. This was something else entirely. We need to leave. Now, Tyler whispered urgently. But it was too late. A massive shadow fell over them as the largest dragon Kira had ever seen descended from the sky. This creature was easily 3 times the size of the others they had encountered, with scales that shifted color like liquid fire. Ancient scars marked her hide, telling stories of battles fought long before humans had ever left their home planet. Tyler raised his makeshift weapon, but the dragon made no move to attack. Instead, she studied them with eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. When she spoke, her voice was like distant thunder. The sounds were complex, almost musical. Not the simple roars and growls Kira had expected, but something that sounded almost like language. She's trying to communicate, Kira whispered in amazement. Tyler slowly lowered his weapon. I've been wondering about this. Sometimes when they call to each other, it sounds too organized to be just animal noises. The great dragon tilted her massive head, watching their reactions. She made another series of sounds, pointing with one enormous claw toward the carved walls around them. Kira stepped forward, ignoring Tyler's worried gesture. Using her knowledge of ancient languages and taking cues from the dragon's gestures, she began to piece together meaning from the sounds. She's talking about the ruins, Kira said excitedly. I think she's saying something about guardians and ancient knowledge. The dragon's eyes brightened and she made more complex sounds. This time she gestured toward the sky, then back to the ruins, then to Kira and Tyler themselves. Tyler watched in fascination as his companion began a halting conversation with a creature that was supposed to be mindless. This is incredible. You're actually talking to her. Over the next hour, through gestures, simple sounds, and incredible patience, a basic communication system emerged. The dragon, who seemed to call herself something like Flame That Remembers, indicated that she was indeed a guardian of this place. Through broken phrases and careful pointing, Flame That Remembers explained that her people had once built great cities among the stars. But something had gone wrong long ago, and now only she and her kind remained to protect what was left of their civilization. She's not just a dragon, Kira realized. She's a historian, a keeper of knowledge. Tyler shook his head in wonder. 2 years I've been here, and I never imagined anything like this was possible. Flame that remembers led them deeper into the ruins than any outsider had ever gone. In the heart of the ancient complex, they discovered chambers filled with technology that still hummed with power after thousands of years. Crystalline matrices glowed with internal light, and walls displayed star maps that showed the entire galaxy. This isn't just archaeology, Tyler breathed, his engineering background helping him recognize functional machinery. This stuff is still working. The Dragon Guardian watched approvingly as Tyler examined the alien technology with the fearless curiosity that had kept him alive for 2 years. His hands moved over control surfaces that responded to his touch, as if the machines had been waiting for someone with his particular combination of intuition and technical knowledge. Kira found herself studying displays that showed star positions and energy readings that were far beyond anything her empire had achieved. This technology could change everything, she whispered. Ships, weapons, power sources, all of it centuries ahead of what we know. Flame that remembers made a sound of agreement, then moved to a particular section of the ancient machinery. Through gestures and their growing shared vocabulary, she explained that these devices contained the knowledge of the builders, waiting for worthy guardians to claim it. But their moment of discovery was shattered by the roar of engines overhead. Through the crystal formations above, they could see the dark shapes of Soltarian warships descending from orbit. Prince Devon's voice echoed across the wasteland from powerful speakers. People of the Empire, I have come to cleanse these lands of dishonor. The dragons will burn and order will be restored. Flame that remembers turned to her new allies, her massive head tilting in what both humans had learned was a question. The meaning was clear. Would they stand with her people against this threat? Tyler checked his improvised weapons and grinned fiercely. Well, Princess, looks like your brother just picked a fight with the wrong dragons. Kira felt something awaken inside her that had nothing to do with royal blood or noble birth. For the first time in her life she was part of something that mattered, something worth fighting for. Then let's show him what happens when humans and dragons work together, she said. The war for Zirian 4 was about to begin. Flame that remembers led Kira and Tyler through passages that had been sealed for centuries. The ancient dragon moved with surprising grace through corridors carved by her ancestors, her massive form somehow fitting through spaces that seemed impossibly narrow. As they descended deeper into the ruins, the air grew warmer and filled with a strange humming sound. The heart chamber, Flame that remembers explained through their growing shared language, where the makers left their greatest gift. They emerged into a cavern so vast that their voices echoed for several seconds. The walls were covered in the same intricate carvings they had seen before, but these were different. These told a story. Tyler studied the images with growing amazement. These pictures, they're showing the history of this place. Look, here's a civilization at its peak. Cities in the sky, ships traveling between stars. But then something went wrong. Kira traced her fingers along carvings that showed great disasters. A war maybe? Or some kind of natural catastrophe. The cities are falling, the ships are crashing. But here, look at this part. The final images showed the survivors, the ancestors of Flame that remembers, taking on the role of guardians. They had hidden the most important technology deep underground, waiting for the day when worthy beings would come to claim it. They weren't just protecting ruins, Tyler realized. They were protecting the future. In the center of the chamber stood machines that defied everything they thought they knew about technology. Crystalline structures twisted through the air like frozen lightning, connected by streams of pure energy. Control panels made of living crystal responded to touch with gentle pulses of light. Flame that remembers gestured toward the machines with obvious reverence. Through careful explanation, she made them understand that this was a trial. The ancient makers had built these devices to test anyone who sought their knowledge. Only those who proved themselves worthy through courage, wisdom, and sacrifice could unlock the technology's full potential. A trial, Kira repeated, looking at the alien machinery. What kind of trial? The answer came when Tyler approached the central control matrix. As his hands touched the crystal surface, the entire chamber filled with light. Suddenly they weren't standing in ruins anymore. They were in space, surrounded by stars and the ghostly images of the civilization that once ruled this system. It's a simulation, Tyler breathed. But it feels completely real. They found themselves on the command deck of an ancient starship, with the phantom crew of the long-dead builders moving around them. The ship was under attack by some terrible enemy, its systems failing one by one. The trial was clear: save the ship and its crew or watch a civilization die. Tyler's engineering instincts kicked in immediately. The ship's systems were alien, but the principles were familiar. Energy flow, structural integrity, defensive systems, it was all just engineering problems waiting to be solved. His hands moved over the controls with growing confidence. I need to reroute power from the secondary generators, he muttered, working frantically. Kira, can you figure out those tactical displays? We need to coordinate our defense. Kira's royal education had included military strategy, but this was unlike any battle she had studied. The enemy ships moved in patterns that made no sense by human standards. But as she watched their movements, she began to see the logic behind them. They're not trying to destroy us, she realized. They're trying to capture the ship intact. They want the technology for themselves. Working together, they began to turn the tide of the Phantom battle. Tyler's repairs kept the ship functional while Kira's strategic thinking helped them outmaneuver their attackers. But the simulation had one more test for them. A critical system failure forced them to make an impossible choice. They could save the ship and its technology, or they could save the civilian population of a nearby colony. There wasn't enough power to do both. Tyler looked at Kira, and she could see the same thought reflected in his eyes. The technology was incredibly valuable, but not more valuable than innocent lives. Save the colony, Kira said without hesitation. Tyler nodded and began redirecting all available power to the evacuation ships. The Phantom civilization's greatest treasures would be lost, but their people would survive to rebuild. The simulation faded and they found themselves back in the ancient chamber. But now the machinery around them pulsed with new life. Flame that remembers made sounds of approval and pride. We passed, Tyler said in amazement. But what did we actually accomplish? The answer came as knowledge flooded their minds. Not through words or images but through direct understanding. They suddenly knew how to operate technology that was thousands of years ahead of anything their species had achieved. Energy manipulation, faster-than-light travel, weapons that could reshape matter at the molecular level, all of it became as familiar as breathing. This is incredible, Kira gasped, feeling the weight of ancient wisdom settling into her consciousness. With this knowledge we could transform the entire galaxy. But their moment of triumph was interrupted by explosions from above. Prince Devon's fleet had begun its attack on the Dragon territories. Through the crystal formations overhead, they could see the bright flashes of energy weapons and the dark smoke of burning landscape. Flame that remembers roared in fury, her call echoing through the chamber and being answered by dozens of other dragons across the wasteland. The Guardians were preparing for war. Tyler was already moving toward the ancient control systems, his new knowledge showing him possibilities he had never imagined. These machines aren't just for storing information. They're manufacturing systems. We can build defenses, weapons, maybe even ships. How long do we have? Kira asked, watching the battle unfold above them. Devon brought a full battle fleet, she calculated grimly. 15 heavy cruisers, probably twice that many fighters. Even with Dragonfire, we're outnumbered 100 to 1. Tyler's grin was fierce and confident. Then it's a good thing we're not planning to fight fair. He began activating systems that had slept for millennia. Ancient machines stirred to life, their crystal matrices glowing with power that had waited ages for the right moment to be unleashed. Flame that remembers gathered her fellow guardians around the entrance to the chamber. Through their shared communication, Kira could feel the dragon's determination. They had protected these ruins for thousands of years. They would not fail now. Your brother wanted to destroy something he didn't understand, Tyler said as weapon systems that predated human civilization came online around them. Time to show him what he's really up against. The final battle for Zirian 4 was about to begin, but this time, the defenders had advantages that Prince Devon couldn't possibly have imagined. Ancient technology, human determination, and Dragonfire were about to change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The battle for Zirian 4 began at dawn when Prince Devon's warships opened fire on the crystal formations below. He had brought enough firepower to level entire cities, confident that nothing could stand against the might of the Soltarian Empire. What he didn't expect was the coordinated response that came from the ancient ruins. Tyler worked frantically at the control systems in the heart chamber, his hands moving across crystalline interfaces that responded to his thoughts as much as his touch. The ancient technology was beyond anything he had imagined, but his human instinct for improvisation helped him understand it in ways its original creators might never have intended. I'm linking the Dragon communication network to the defense systems, he called out to Kira as explosions shook the cavern above them. If we can coordinate their attacks with the automated weapons, we might actually have a chance. Kira stood beside Flame that remembers, serving as a bridge between human tactics and dragon instincts. Through their growing shared language, she helped coordinate strike patterns that no military academy had ever taught. Dragons weren't just powerful, they were intelligent fighters who could adapt their strategies in real time. The first wave of Devon's attack met resistance unlike anything in recorded history. Ancient weapon systems emerged from the crystal formations, firing beams of pure energy that cut through Imperial shields like paper. But it wasn't just the technology that surprised the attackers, it was the intelligence behind it. Impossible, Admiral Kane reported from the flagship bridge. The dragons are using coordinated tactics. They're not just animals, they're organized like a military force. Prince Devon watched the battle displays with growing fury. They're just oversized lizards. Increase firepower and finish this. But Tyler had learned something important during his 2 years of survival. Humans didn't win fights by being stronger or having better weapons. They won by being smarter, more adaptable, and more willing to try crazy ideas that shouldn't work but somehow did. Kira, I need you to tell the dragons to fall back toward the northern canyon, he said, his fingers dancing over the ancient controls. I'm going to try something that's either brilliant or completely insane. With you, those tend to be the same thing, Kira replied, but she conveyed the message to Flame that remembers. The dragons retreated in what looked like a panicked rout, drawing Devon's forces deeper into the crystal maze. The Imperial ships followed eagerly, thinking they had their enemies on the run. They had no idea they were flying into the most sophisticated trap ever devised. Tyler had figured out how to turn the entire crystal formation into a massive focusing lens. When he activated the system, energy from the planet's core was channeled through millions of crystal structures, creating a beam that could slice through a mountain. Devon's flagship took the full force of the blast and simply vanished in a flash of light. The remaining Imperial ships scattered in panic, but the dragons were ready for them. Flame that remembers led a coordinated strike that demonstrated the perfect fusion of ancient wisdom, human strategy, and pure draconic power. Ship after ship fell to attacks that came from angles no human pilot had ever considered. Admiral Kane, now in command of what remained of the fleet, made the only decision that made sense. All ships retreat. Repeat, all ships retreat immediately. But it was too late for Prince Devon. His escape pod had been captured by a dragon patrol, and now he found himself face to face with the sister he had tried to murder. Kira stood before him in the ruins of his ambitions, no longer the naive princess he had betrayed. This is impossible, Devon gasped, staring at the dragons that surrounded him. They're just beasts. Animals without souls or intelligence. They're partners, Kira replied calmly. Something you never learned to understand. You saw only what you expected to see, and it blinded you to the truth. Tyler emerged from the command chamber, his clothes singed from the battle but his eyes bright with triumph. Your brother's got a real talent for underestimating people. First me, then the dragons, then you. Not a great strategy for someone trying to run an empire. Devon looked between them with growing horror. You can't seriously think you can challenge the entire Soltarian Empire with a handful of dragons and one human castaway. Watch us, Kira said simply. 3 months later, the news of what had happened on Zirion 4 had spread across the galaxy. The impossible story of a human and a dragon working together had captured imaginations everywhere. When Princess Kira returned to the Imperial capital, she didn't come alone. Tyler walked beside her up the palace steps, no longer a stranded survivor but an ambassador representing a new kind of partnership. Behind them came Flame that remembers and a delegation of dragons, living proof that intelligence and nobility weren't limited to any single species. Emperor Thane, aged and broken by the reports of his son's defeat, met them in the throne room. The old man's hands shook as he removed the crown from his own head. I don't understand how this is possible, he admitted. Everything I was taught, everything our civilization believes, says this shouldn't work. That's exactly why it does work, father, Kira replied gently. Our empire was built on the idea that some people are born better than others. But Tyler taught me that real strength comes from what you do, not who your parents are. The coronation ceremony was unlike anything in Imperial history. Instead of the traditional crown of conquest, Kira wore a circlet made from human steel and dragon-forged crystal, symbolizing the union of 3 civilizations. Today the Soltarian Empire ends, she announced to the assembled crowds. In its place rises the Galactic Confederation, where worth is measured by actions, not bloodlines. Where humans, dragons, and any species willing to stand as equals will find welcome. Tyler smiled as he watched his friend transform from an exiled princess into something far greater. She wasn't just ruling a nation now, she was building a future where partnership mattered more than power. The ancient dragon technology, combined with human adaptability and draconic wisdom, opened new possibilities that none of them had imagined. Faster ships, cleaner energy, weapons that could protect rather than just destroy, all of it became reality through cooperation. In the months that followed, other species began to join the Confederation. News of the Human-Dragon Alliance spread hope across worlds that had been oppressed by empires built on rigid hierarchies. Revolution wasn't always violent, sometimes it was as simple as showing people a better way. Prince Devon spent his remaining days in exile, never understanding how his perfectly planned betrayal had led to his sister becoming the most powerful leader in the galaxy. He had tried to kill her by throwing her to dragons, but instead, he had given her the chance to become something greater than royalty. She had become a bridge between worlds, and Tyler had shown her that the greatest strength came not from being above others, but from lifting them up alongside you. The age of partnership had begun, and the galaxy would never be the same.